الحمد لله وكفى وسلام على عباده الذين اصطفى أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم تلك حدود الله فلا تقربوها سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون والسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states in His glorious book, تِلْكَ حُدُودُ اللَّهِ فَلَا تَقْرَبُوهَا. These are the borders of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so don't approach them. Meaning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made very clear what's halal and what's haram. And there's a border between them. Very, very clear, distinct border. Just like you have a border between the United States and Mexico, the United States and Canada, there is a very well-defined border that exists between those actions which are halal and those actions which are haram. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states very clearly in the Quran that this is the border of Allah, meaning that there are certain verses in the Quran which establish the border between halal and haram, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us very clearly that we should not approach these borders. Similarly, if you look at the ayah in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands Adam alayhi salam, well, let's put that on the side for a second. Let me just establish one principle so that you understand this. So that's the border of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We, in our life, have the requirement of not only not crossing that border. So one thing is to say, okay, I'll do everything, but I won't cross the border. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us don't even approach the border. Meaning, where there is sin within Islam, where there's something that's haram, you should not even approach that area, because if you approach that area, you have the danger of crossing over that border and therefore doing something that's very, very wrong. These are called, for example, rings of defenses. Think of it this way. The more rings of defenses you place around yourself, the safer you will be from the attack of shaitan. Now, every single person in this room has taken the shahada. By the default state of being a Muslim, you always get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Just being a Muslim. There is nur, there's barakah, there is sakina that descends upon you by the mere fact, look at all the good deeds you do all day. You wake up in the morning as a Muslim. You have the shahada on your tongues. You pray 5 times a day. You perform wudu. You fast in the month of Ramadan. You read the Quran on occasion. You try to be as good as a person as you can be. Everybody does that. All of us do that. Every single person does that. Yet there is still something lacking within our deen. There's still something that, for some reason or another, we feel empty, or we just don't progress. And the reason is because along with these good deeds, we continue to do certain bad deeds, and those bad deeds hold us back. Usually the problem with a Muslim isn't that they don't do good deeds. Every Muslim I know does good deeds. They donate when they can. They pray in the masjid as much as they can. The problem usually is that they're caught up in some sort of bad deed that holds them down and does not allow them to progress closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you understand that much, and if that's your situation, then this ayah is essential for your progress. تِلْكَ حُدُودُ اللَّهِ فَلَا تَقْرَبُوهَا. Those are the borders of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so don't approach them. I can guarantee you that if you want to avoid sin and want to avoid those things that are holding you back from progressing towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then the number one thing that you have to do is to avoid anything that takes you nearer to the border of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. For example, you know that you shouldn't eat pork. Okay? Now, if you are someone who is very, very careful about what they eat, then you will not only avoid pork, but you'll also, if you're someone who is very careful about what they eat, you will not only avoid pork, but you'll also avoid all the other things that are makruh that could potentially bring you close to that border. Similarly, let me take a better example. The common example of looking where you shouldn't look. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded us in the Quran, قُلْ لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ يَغُضُّوا مِنْ أَبْصَارِهِمْ. Tell the mu'mineen to lower their gaze. Meaning they shouldn't look at the ghayr mahram. Now if you go into a place where it may be halal to go, but you challenge yourself and you come close to the border of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by being in that environment, you won't survive. Look, if you go to the mall in the middle of the day, 3 o'clock on a hot summer day, you know that people are going to be there and they're not going to be dressed properly. And because of that, you won't be able to survive. So what this ayah is highlighting is that don't even go into those places where sin is a possibility. Meaning don't even approach it. Don't even go there. One thing is to perform the sin, the other thing is to avoid the places where that sin can occur. So these are your levels of defense. These are the way that you defend yourself. Now your goal is to, for example, not commit zina. But the way that you avoid not committing zina is that you don't go into the environment where your eyes might hit the things that they shouldn't hit. You don't approach those places where people like that might hang out, etc. So that's what we mean by watching out for the borders of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Take another example. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says about Adam alayhi salam, when He sent Adam alayhi salam to Jannah, He says, what is the ayah? And after that, next ayah. وَإِذْ قَالَ رَبُّكَ لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ وَإِذْ قُلْنَا لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ اسْجُدُوا وَإِذْ قُلْنَا لِآدَمَ. What is it? Who's the Hafiz? Huh? وَإِذْ قُلْنَا لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ اسْجُدُوا لِآدَمَ فَسَجَدُوا إِلَّا إِبْلِيسَ أَبَى وَاسْتَكْبَرَ وَكَانَ مِنَ الْكَافِرِينَ وَقُلْنَا يَا آدَمُ اسْكُنْ أَنْتَ وَزَوْجُكَ الْجَنَّةَ وَكُلَا مِنْهَا رَغَدًا حَيْثُ شِئْتُمَا وَلَا تَقْرَبَا هَذِهِ الشَّجَرَةَ فَتَكُونَا مِنَ الظَّالِمِينَ. And when we said to Adam alayhi salam that he and his wife should live in the Jannah, they can eat and drink from whatever they want, but they should not approach one particular tree. That was the command that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave Adam alayhi salam. Now, everybody knows in commentary of the Quran that the actual command was not that they couldn't go near the tree. Going near the tree was permissible. The problem was that they shouldn't eat from that tree. Right? But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't tell them don't eat from that tree. He says don't even go near that tree. Don't approach that tree. Now the thing that they are being commanded not to do is to eat from that tree. That's the actual sin. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells them don't go near that tree. So this highlights a very, very important principle. But if you want to avoid something, you cannot put yourself in the environment where that occurs. You won't survive. You'll get run over like a truck. It's like standing in the middle of the street and saying, because I'm a good Muslim, this truck that's going to come down the highway is not going to run me over. There's no way. You will get run over. So in the same way, when there is something that you find out, everybody has their own problems in their life. And that's your responsibility, to examine your life and to ask yourself, okay, these are the things that are holding me back. And when you find them, then you need to avoid that altogether. Avoid those circumstances where that thing occurs altogether. So if your problem is that you eat food that's bad, don't even go to a place that has any kind of food like that, because you take a huge chance with that. If your problem is that you look at the wrong things, don't even go to a place where you have a possibility of looking at those things, because you won't be able to hold your eyes down. You can't say, okay, I'm gonna go to to the mall at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and I'll keep my eyes down. You'll lose. Shaitan is way too powerful. He is like a truck. He will run you over in the middle of the street. You will lose. So the point is that where there is something in your life that you're trying to avoid, then not only should you make it a point to avoid that thing, but you should avoid those environments where that action occurs. Same way, if you look at the other way, these are circles of defenses. In the same way, the good deeds that you do. Now, if there is a person that always prays sunnah mu'akkada. Sunnah mu'akkada are those definite sunnahs that you pray at the time of prayer. And they also pray all their nawafil. So they come to the masjid, they pray, for example, they pray four farad before Dhuhr, then they pray the fourth sunnah before Dhuhr, then they pray the fourth sunnah of Dhuhr, then they pray the two sunnah after Dhuhr, and then they pray the two nafil after that. If that person gets caught in a tough circumstance and is busy or runs out of time, the first thing that'll happen is they'll stop praying the nafil. Right? So they'll drop the nafil maybe one day. But they'll still pray their farad and they'll still pray their sunnah. And then maybe if that person gets in a very, very tight circumstance, they might drop one sunnah. Maybe the one after the Dhuhr, maybe the one before the Dhuhr. And then maybe if they get even in a more tight circumstance, they might drop all the sunnahs and just pray the farad. But they have all these rings of defense. When it comes into their mind that they need to shorten their prayer and they don't have time, the first thing they'll think is, okay, I won't pray my nafil. Then they might think a little bit beyond that, okay, I won't pray one of my sunnah. And at the most, they might think, okay, I won't pray both of my sunnahs. So, but their farad will still remain intact. Those, because they have so many barriers to protect them, that's protecting their farad. But those people who just pray their farad and don't pray anything else, you'll find that there are so many days that they even miss their farad. Because there's nothing to defend their farad, there's no line of protection. When shaitan gets that person and convinces him he doesn't have time for prayer, the only thing to go is the farad. He doesn't pray the sunnah and the nafil anyway. So these are called the barriers of your defense. These are the barriers that you set up. The more good deeds that you do, the harder it is for shaitan to take away your core iman, to strip you of your iman. But if you do nothing, just take a very simple example. If you go to a class and you have the niyyah that I just want to pass this class and D is okay, then there's a good chance that you'll flunk, right? Because you're aiming for a D, you might get a couple percentage points below a D and you might flunk the class. But if you go into a class saying, I'm going to get an A, it's very, very unlikely that you're going to flunk. You might get a B, you might get a C, but you won't flunk the class. That's the exact same thing with your iman. When you try to maximize, and you have in your mind this intention that I am going to maximize the good deeds that I do, then it's very unlikely that your iman will be stripped away. You might get a B, you might get a C, but you're not going to flunk the test of Islam. But if you have the attitude that I'm just going to get away with a minimum, I just have to just pray these 4 farad and that's it, and I don't have to do anything more, then there's a very, very good chance that you may fall slightly short and actually flunk the course. And the problem is when you flunk this course, there's no other recourse. There's no other hope. Because on the day of judgment, you have nothing else to show. So, this is what I mean by these barriers of defense that you set up. So, we have to do 2 important things. The first is to avoid those circumstances where we might slip and where we might fall and trip over our feet and lose some important aspects of our deen. And the second is that we should increase our good deeds so that we aim to get an A. So within our deen, the goal should be that we aim to get an A, and then inshallah, if we fall short, we might get a B, we might get a C, but at least we won't flunk. So that's the key thing to keep in mind.